Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Endeavour and watched the stars through the main screen. His ship was the most advanced vessel humanity had ever built. It could travel faster than light and carry 300 crew members across the galaxy. Jake had been chosen to lead this mission because he was one of the best captains in the human fleet. He was 35 years old with brown hair and steady green eyes that never showed fear. The year was 2157, and humanity had finally reached the stars. Earth had built 12 colonies on different worlds, but they were all close to home. This mission was different. Jake was taking his ship farther than any human had gone before. They were heading to the Kepler 442 system where they hoped to find new worlds to settle. Lisa Parker worked at the engineering station behind Jake. She was 28 with red hair and quick hands that could fix any machine. Lisa had designed many of the ship's systems herself. Next to her stood Ryan Brooks, who controlled the ship's weapons. Ryan was tall and strong with black hair and dark eyes. He had served in Earth's military for 10 years before joining this mission. The crew had been traveling for 6 months when they finally reached their destination. The Kepler 442 system had 7 planets orbiting a yellow star much like Earth's sun. Jake ordered his crew to begin scanning the worlds for signs of life and places to build a colony. What they found was better than they had hoped. The third planet had water and air that humans could breathe. Jake decided to establish a small colony on the planet. He sent down 50,000 people, including his younger brother Danny, who was an expert at building settlements. Danny was only 30 years old, but he was already known as one of the best colony builders in human space. The colonists worked hard, and within weeks they had built a small city near a large lake. Everything seemed perfect until the day the alien ships arrived. Jake was eating breakfast in his quarters when the ship's alarms began to sound. He ran to the bridge where Lisa was staring at her screens with wide eyes. Hundreds of massive ships had appeared in the system without warning. The vessels were unlike anything humans had ever seen. They were dark and angular with strange symbols glowing along their hulls. Ryan checked his weapon systems but quickly realized the human ship was completely outmatched. The smallest alien vessel was twice the size of the Endeavour. The largest ships were so huge they could have swallowed entire cities. Jake had never felt so small and helpless in his life. A voice suddenly filled the bridge, speaking perfect English. The voice was deep and cold like winter wind. It belonged to Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire. Kethvar was a reptilian creature over 8 feet tall with scales that changed color and eyes like yellow fire. He had been conquering worlds. For over 200 years, Kethvar told Jake that humans had entered Zephyrian space without permission. The Zephyrian Empire controlled this entire sector of the galaxy and had done so for 3,000 years. They had conquered hundreds of different species during that time. Some aliens had joined the Empire willingly, while others had been forced to surrender after their worlds were destroyed. The Admiral explained that humans had 2 choices. They could surrender completely and accept Zephyrian rule over all human worlds. If they agreed, then humanity would become servants of the Empire, but they would be allowed to live. If they refused, then the Zephyrians would destroy every human colony and ship until nothing remained. Jake looked at his crew and saw fear in their eyes, but also determination. Humans had fought for thousands of years to reach the stars. They had worked and sacrificed to build their colonies and explore new worlds. Jake knew he could not simply hand over everything his species had achieved to these alien conquerors. He told Admiral Kethvar that humanity would never surrender. Humans were free people who would rather die than become slaves. Jake's words made the alien laugh. Kethvar said he had heard similar speeches from hundreds of species before they all eventually begged for mercy. The Admiral decided to teach humanity a lesson about the price of defiance. He ordered his fleet to attack the human colony on Kepler 442b. Jake watched helplessly as alien ships surrounded the planet and began firing their weapons. The colony's defenses were useless against the advanced alien technology. Within hours, the entire settlement was burning. All 50,000 colonists, including Danny Morrison, were dead. The Zephyrians had not even bothered to demand surrender from the colonists. They simply destroyed everything to make their point clear. Jake stared at the burning planet where his brother had died and felt something change inside him. The aliens thought this display of power would break human spirit and force them to surrender. They believed humans were just another weak species that would crumble at the first sign of real opposition. Admiral Kethvar contacted the human ship one final time. He gave Jake 24 hours to contact Earth and arrange humanity's complete surrender. If Earth refused, then the Zephyrian fleet would travel to human space and destroy every world until humanity no longer existed. Jake knew the aliens had made a terrible mistake. They thought humans would break under pressure, but they had never faced a species like humanity before. The death of 50,000 innocent people had not weakened human resolve. Instead, it had awakened something dangerous that would change the galaxy forever. 6 months had passed since the massacre at Kepler 442b, and humanity was preparing for war. Earth's leaders had rejected the Zephyrian demands for surrender and instead began building defenses throughout human space. Every colony received weapons and supplies while new military bases were constructed in asteroid fields and on remote moons. General Patricia Stone commanded Earth's military forces from a secret base hidden deep inside Luna. She was 42, years old with gray hair and steel blue eyes that missed nothing. Patricia had spent 20 years studying military history and tactics from every human conflict. Now she was preparing to fight an enemy more powerful than anything humanity had ever faced. The Zephyrians had given humans 6 months to prepare, but Admiral Kethvar was growing impatient. His superiors in the Empire were asking why he had not conquered this new species yet. Other Zephyrian commanders mocked him for being defeated by primitive aliens who had barely learned to travel between stars. Fleet Commander Vexthul volunteered to lead the first real attack against human space. Vexthul was younger than Kethvar, but just as cruel. He was a tall alien with purple scales and 4 arms that could move faster than human eyes could follow. Vexthul commanded 300 warships and believed that would be more than enough to crush human resistance. The Zephyrian fleet targeted the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, where humans had built several mining colonies. These settlements provided rare metals and resources that Earth needed for building ships and weapons. Vexthul planned to capture the colonies quickly and use them as bases for attacking Earth itself. Carl Rodriguez managed the largest mining station at Ceres. He was 38 years old with black hair and strong hands from years of working in space. Carl had grown up poor on Earth, but found success in the asteroid belt, where hard work was rewarded. When the war began, he refused to evacuate his station and instead prepared to defend it. Carl had modified the mining equipment to serve as weapons. The powerful lasers used for cutting asteroids could also slice through spacecraft hulls. Cargo. Haulers became assault ships armed with nuclear missiles. Even the smallest mining pods carried explosives that could damage enemy vessels. When Vexthul's fleet arrived at Ceres, they expected to find frightened civilians begging for mercy. Instead, they discovered a fortress bristling with improvised weapons. Carl had organized every miner and worker into a fighting force that was ready to die rather than surrender their home. The battle began at dawn when Zephyrian ships surrounded the mining station. Vexthul demanded immediate surrender and was shocked when Carl responded by opening fire with every weapon at his disposal. Mining lasers struck alien shields, while converted cargo ships launched suicide attacks against the enemy fleet. The Zephyrians had superior technology, but they were not prepared for human tactics. Human defenders used tricks learned from Earth's history of warfare. They pretended to retreat, then ambushed pursuing ships. They hid explosive charges on asteroids and detonated them when enemy vessels came close. Most shocking of all, they deliberately destroyed their own facilities rather than let them fall into alien hands. Ryan Murphy commanded a small flotilla of mining ships that harassed the Zephyrian fleet. Ryan was 25 with bright red hair and a reckless courage that terrified even his own crew. He led his ships in attacks that seemed suicidal, but somehow succeeded in damaging much larger enemy vessels. The fighting at Ceres lasted for 3 days and ended with Zephyrian victory, but at a terrible cost. Carl Rodriguez died when he personally flew his ship into a Zephyrian cruiser, destroying both vessels. Before the station fell, the defenders activated nuclear charges that turned the entire complex into radioactive wreckage that was useless to the aliens. Similar battles occurred throughout the asteroid belt as human defenders fought with desperate courage. At Vesta Station, the garrison held out for 5 days before being overwhelmed. At Palace Colony, the humans managed to destroy an entire Zephyrian squadron before their own base was obliterated. Every human settlement fought to the last person and made the aliens pay dearly for each victory. Fleet Commander Vexthul had expected easy conquests that would boost his reputation in the Empire. Instead, he found himself commanding a battered fleet that had lost nearly a third of its ships to primitive human forces. The aliens had won every battle, but they were disturbed by human behavior that made no sense to them. Admiral Kethvar studied the battle reports and felt a growing unease. The humans had lost every engagement and suffered enormous casualties, but their morale seemed unbroken. Captured human prisoners refused to provide information even under torture. They spoke constantly about freedom and sacrifice in ways that confused their alien captors. Other species conquered by the Zephyrians had eventually seen reason and accepted their fate. They understood that resistance was futile against superior power and chose survival over pointless defiance. Humans seemed incapable of such logical thinking. They would rather die than live as slaves. General Patricia Stone received reports from the asteroid belt and felt proud of the defenders who had given their lives. Their sacrifice had taught humanity valuable lessons about fighting the aliens. Human weapons could damage Zephyrian ships if used correctly. The enemy could be hurt, and their advance could be slowed. More importantly, the battles had revealed something crucial about the aliens themselves. The Zephyrians were powerful, but they followed predictable patterns in their attacks. They relied on overwhelming force and expected quick victories. A long, grinding war was something they had never experienced before. Patricia began planning new defensive strategies based on what the asteroid belt battles had taught her. Humans could not match alien technology, but they could use tactics and determination to make conquest too expensive for the Empire to continue. If every human world fought like Ceres Station, then the Zephyrians would bleed ships and crews until they were forced to withdraw. The aliens controlled the asteroid belt now, but they had paid a price that shocked their commanders. For the first time in their long history of conquest, the Zephyrians faced an enemy that became more dangerous with each defeat. They had broken human defenses, but they had not broken human spirit. Admiral Kethvar realized he was fighting a war unlike any he had experienced before. The humans were teaching the galaxy something new about the power of determination and the refusal to surrender. He began to suspect that conquering humanity would require more time and resources than the Empire was prepared to spend. 1 year had passed since the war began, and humanity was learning how to survive against impossible odds. The Zephyrian Empire controlled most of the outer colonies, but their advance toward Earth had slowed to a crawl. Every human world they attacked cost them ships and time they had not expected to spend. Dr. Elena Martinez worked in a secret laboratory hidden beneath the surface of Luna. She was 31 years old with dark hair and intense brown eyes that rarely looked away from her research. Elena had been studying captured Zephyrian technology for months, trying to understand how their weapons and shields functioned. The alien equipment was far more advanced than anything humans had built, but Elena discovered it followed scientific principles that human minds could grasp. She worked with a team of the best engineers and scientists from Earth who had volunteered for this dangerous assignment. If the Zephyrians found their laboratory, they would all be executed as war criminals. Tony Garcia led the engineering team. That worked with Elena. He was 35 with graying hair and scarred hands from years of building spacecraft. Tony had designed some of Earth's most successful ships before the war, but now he focused on creating weapons that could penetrate alien defenses. The breakthrough came when Elena realized that Zephyrian shields operated on rotating frequencies that changed every few seconds. Human weapons failed because they targeted the wrong frequency at the wrong time. Elena's team developed new targeting computers that could track the frequency changes and time their attacks perfectly. Kate Sullivan worked in intelligence gathering information about enemy movements and tactics. She was 27 with blonde hair and quick blue eyes that could spot patterns others missed. Kate had learned to intercept Zephyrian communications and decode their tactical signals. Through months of careful observation, Kate discovered that the aliens followed rigid military traditions that made their behavior predictable. They always attacked in the same formations and used the same strategies that had worked against other species. Their overconfidence was becoming a weakness that humans could exploit. The first test of humanity's new weapons came during the Battle of Titan. The Zephyrians had established a major staging area on Saturn's largest moon, where they assembled forces for the final assault on Earth. Commander Steve Harrison volunteered to lead an attack against this base using ships equipped with Elena's new targeting systems. Steve was 40 years old with silver hair and calm gray eyes that never showed panic under pressure. He had commanded merchant vessels before the war, but proven himself as a military leader during the defense of the outer colonies. His crew trusted him completely, even when he asked them to attempt missions that seemed impossible. Steve's fleet consisted of 30 converted civilian ships that looked harmless compared to the massive Zephyrian base on Titan. The alien defenders commanded over 100 warships, including a dreadnought that was larger than any vessel humans had ever built. Most military experts believed Steve's mission was suicide. The attack began when human ships approached Titan, pretending to be refugees seeking sanctuary. The Zephyrians allowed them to come close before revealing their true identity and opening fire. Steve's ships immediately scattered and began using tactics the aliens had never seen before. Human vessels deliberately rammed into enemy ships, causing devastating explosions. Crews activated nuclear self-destruct devices when their ships were about to be captured. Most shocking of all, Steve personally flew a cargo hauler loaded with fusion reactors directly into the alien dreadnought's main hull. The explosion that followed lit up the entire Titan system and destroyed the most powerful ship in the Zephyrian fleet. Steve died in the blast, but his sacrifice eliminated the enemy's command vessel and threw their entire operation into chaos. The surviving human ships escaped while the aliens struggled to reorganize their shattered forces. News of the victory at Titan spread throughout human space and gave people hope that the war could be won. More importantly, it taught the Zephyrians that they were fighting an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. Human tactics violated every rule of civilized warfare, but they were terrifyingly effective. Admiral Kethvar studied reports from the battle and felt something he had never experienced in 2 centuries of conquest. For the first time in his career, he was beginning to doubt whether the Empire could defeat its enemy. The humans seemed to become more dangerous with each defeat they suffered. The battle had cost humanity 27 ships and nearly 1,000 lives, but they had destroyed a Zephyrian dreadnought and delayed the invasion of Earth by several months. Human mathematicians calculated that if every engagement produced similar results, the aliens would run out of ships before they conquered all human worlds. General Patricia Stone used the time gained at Titan to strengthen Earth's defenses and train new crews for the expanding human fleet. She established secret bases throughout the solar system where resistance fighters could operate if Earth itself fell to alien invasion. The war was changing both sides in ways neither had expected. Humans were learning to fight with a desperation and creativity that shocked their enemies. They combined advanced technology with primitive tactics that confused alien commanders who expected civilized behavior. The Zephyrians found themselves fighting a grinding war of attrition against an enemy that refused to follow normal patterns of conquest. Every human world required a separate invasion that cost ships and time. Captured territories had to be heavily guarded because human resistance fighters constantly sabotaged alien operations. Other species within the Empire began to take notice of the human resistance. For the first time in generations, they saw an enemy that could hurt the supposedly invincible Zephyrians. Whispered conversations in slave quarters spoke of hope and the possibility that the Empire's rule might not be eternal. Dr. Elena Martinez continued her research and made new discoveries that improved human weapons with each passing month. Her team had learned to reverse engineer alien technology and combine it with human innovation to create hybrid systems that often surprised even their creators. The Zephyrians had expected to conquer humanity within months, but the war was now entering, its second year with no end in sight. Human space was mostly under alien control, but Earth remained free and human ships continued to strike at enemy targets throughout the galaxy. Admiral Kethvar realized he was fighting a war that could not be won through traditional methods. The humans had proven they would never surrender, and their resistance was inspiring other species to question Zephyrian authority. What had begun as a simple conquest was becoming a threat to the entire empire. 2 years into the war, the conflict had changed everything for both humans and aliens. The Zephyrian Empire found itself fighting a type of enemy they had never encountered before. Human space was largely conquered, but humanity had established hidden bases throughout the galaxy and was waging a new kind of warfare that terrified their enemies. Major Alex Turner commanded a special operations unit that struck deep behind enemy lines. He was 33 years old with brown hair and sharp green eyes that could spot weaknesses in any defense. Alex had been a commando before the war, but now he led the most feared human unit in the galaxy. Alex's team operated from stolen Zephyrian ships that allowed them to move freely through alien territory. They had learned to speak alien languages and understand enemy protocols well enough to fool most guards and checkpoints. Their raids targeted supply depots and communication centers that kept the Empire's vast fleet operational. The humans had discovered that the Zephyrian Empire depended on complex supply chains that stretched across hundreds of star systems. Destroying a single fuel depot could strand an entire fleet, while sabotaging communication relays left alien commanders blind to enemy movements. Alex's raiders had become masters of this invisible warfare. Captain Brian Lewis served as Alex's second in command and led the team's technical specialists. Brian was 29 with black hair and quick hands that could hack any computer system. He had learned to reprogram alien equipment and often turned Zephyrian weapons against their own forces. The raiders struck without warning and vanished into the void before enemy reinforcements could arrive. They had attacked over 50 targets in the past year and never lost a single team member. Zephyrian crews lived in constant fear of these ghost ships that appeared from nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. On Earth, President Nancy Foster coordinated the global resistance from a bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains. She was 51 years old with silver hair and blue eyes that blazed with determination. Nancy had been a diplomat before the war, but now she commanded the United Forces of Humanity in their darkest hour. The war had united humanity in ways that centuries of peace had never achieved. Former enemies worked together against the alien threat while old rivalries were forgotten in the face of extinction. Every nation contributed ships and soldiers to the common defense, while scientists shared their research freely. Dr. Elena Martinez had made breakthrough discoveries that allowed humans to match Zephyrian technology in key areas. Her team had developed new propulsion systems that made human ships faster and more maneuverable than their alien counterparts. They had also created weapons that could penetrate even the strongest enemy shields. The aliens were beginning to fracture under the pressure of this endless war. Several member species of the Empire questioned the wisdom of continuing such a costly conflict. The Zephyrians had conquered hundreds of worlds over 3 millennia, but none had ever cost them so many ships and lives. Commander Zithral led a faction of younger Zephyrian officers who believed the war should be ended through negotiation rather than continued destruction. Zithral was smaller than most of his species, with dark green scales and thoughtful yellow eyes. He argued that humans had proven they could not be conquered through traditional methods. Admiral Kethvar faced growing criticism from his superiors for his failure to crush humanity quickly. The High Council of the Empire demanded explanations for why a primitive species was able to resist their advanced forces. Some council members suggested replacing Kethvar with a more aggressive commander. The war had cost the Empire over 800 ships and nearly 50,000 crew members. These losses were unprecedented in Zephyrian history and were creating doubt among species that had served the Empire for centuries. Rebellions were beginning to break out on worlds that had been peaceful for generations. General Patricia Stone had established a network of resistance cells throughout occupied human territory. These fighters sabotaged alien operations and provided intelligence about enemy movements. They operated in small groups that could strike quickly and hide among the civilian population. Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh led one of the most successful resistance cells on the occupied world of New Boston. She was 26 with red hair and fierce blue eyes that never showed fear. Jennifer's team had destroyed 3 Zephyrian bases and rescued hundreds of human prisoners from alien camps. The resistance fighters used tactics learned from Earth's history of guerrilla warfare. They planted bombs in alien facilities and assassinated collaborators who worked with the occupying forces. Most importantly, they kept the spirit of resistance alive among human civilians who refused to accept alien rule. President Foster received daily reports about the growing problems within the Zephyrian Empire. Human intelligence agents had made contact with several alien species that were planning rebellions against their Zephyrian overlords. The humans offered weapons and training to these potential allies. The war that had begun as a simple conquest was becoming a galaxy-wide revolution against Zephyrian authority. Species that had been slaves for centuries were inspired by human resistance to demand their own freedom. The Empire faced the possibility of complete collapse if they could not find a way to end the human threat. Alex Turner's raiders struck again at a major Zephyrian supply base in the Vega system. They destroyed enough fuel and ammunition to cripple 3 enemy fleets while capturing valuable intelligence about alien military plans. The raid was so successful that Zephyrian commanders began withdrawing forces from advanced positions to protect their supply lines. Dr. Elena Martinez announced another breakthrough that would give human ships even greater advantages in combat. Her team had learned to create artificial gravity fields that could crush enemy vessels or deflect their weapons. The technology was based on Zephyrian science, but improved through human innovation. Admiral Kethvar realized that his empire was losing control of the situation. The humans had done something no previous enemy had managed. They had made the Zephyrians doubt themselves and their ability to maintain order in the galaxy. The war was no longer about conquering one stubborn species, but about preserving the empire itself. The tide of war was turning, but not in the way anyone had expected. Humanity had not simply survived the alien assault, but had transformed it into something much larger. What began as an invasion had become a revolution that threatened to remake the entire galaxy. In the 3rd year of the war, humanity achieved something that shocked the entire galaxy. Admiral Rebecca Harris led a massive strike force that retook the outer planets of the Sol system in the largest space battle in human history. The victory came at enormous cost, but it proved that humans could defeat Zephyrian forces in direct combat. Rebecca was 39 years old, with black hair and steel-gray eyes that had seen too much death. She commanded the new human battleship USS Liberty, which was built using captured alien technology combined with human engineering. The ship was faster and more powerful than anything humanity had ever created before. The battle began when Rebecca's fleet of 200 ships attacked the Zephyrian forces occupying Jupiter's moons. The aliens had established major bases there and considered them absolutely secure. They never expected humans to mount such a large assault so deep in occupied territory. Danny Kim had developed revolutionary new propulsion systems that gave human ships unprecedented speed and maneuverability. Danny was 28, with bright red hair and intense brown eyes that rarely looked away from his work. His engines allowed human vessels to dance around slower alien ships while striking from unexpected angles. The USS Liberty engaged the Zephyrian flagship in single combat while the rest of the human fleet battled enemy cruisers and destroyers. Rebecca's ship had been designed specifically to fight alien dreadnoughts, and it carried weapons that could punch through even the strongest enemy shields. Captain Nicole Johnson commanded the Liberty's weapons systems during the epic duel. Nicole was 32, with blonde hair and steady blue eyes that never wavered under pressure. She had trained for months to understand the complex targeting systems that Dr. Elena Martinez had developed. The battle raged for 18 hours across the entire Jupiter system. Human ships used new tactics that confused and overwhelmed their enemies. They fought in coordinated groups that supported each other while maintaining constant movement to avoid alien weapons. The turning point came when the USS Liberty's main guns finally penetrated the Zephyrian flagship's armor and destroyed its reactor core. The massive explosion lit up the sky and marked the first time a human vessel had defeated an alien dreadnought in single combat. The victory sent shockwaves through both fleets. With their command ship destroyed, the Zephyrian forces began to retreat from the Jupiter system. Human ships pursued them relentlessly while broadcasting the news of their victory throughout the galaxy. The impossible had happened, and humanity was no longer just surviving, but winning. The victory at Jupiter cost humanity 47 ships and over 15,000 lives, but it reclaimed an entire star system from alien control. More importantly, it proved that human technology had finally reached parity with Zephyrian equipment and could defeat them in fair combat. Commander Greg Anderson led diplomatic missions to species that had been conquered by the Zephyrians decades or centuries earlier. Greg was 34 with brown hair and kind green eyes that could convince anyone to trust him. He had been a negotiator before the war, but now he carried a more dangerous message. Greg traveled in secret to worlds throughout the Empire carrying proof that the Zephyrians could be defeated. He showed alien species recordings of human victories and offered weapons and training to those willing to rebel against their oppressors. The response was overwhelming. The Altarians were the first species to openly revolt against Zephyrian rule. They had been slaves for over 400 years, but human success inspired them to demand their freedom. When Zephyrian forces tried to crush their rebellion, the humans provided weapons and military advisors who helped the Altarians achieve victory. Within months, rebellions were breaking out across dozens of worlds as oppressed species followed the human example. The Zephyrian Empire suddenly faced insurrections on multiple fronts while still trying to complete their conquest of humanity. Their forces were stretched thin and morale was cracking. Admiral Kethavar received reports of disasters throughout his empire and realized that the humans had done something unprecedented. They had not only resisted conquest, but had inspired a galaxy-wide revolution against Zephyrian authority. What had begun as a simple subjugation was now threatening the existence of the Empire itself. The High Council of the Empire met in emergency session to discuss the growing crisis. Several member species that had loyally served the Zephyrians for generations were now questioning whether continued war was worth the cost. Some council members secretly began exploring the possibility of peace negotiations. Dr. Elena Martinez announced another breakthrough that would revolutionize space warfare. Her team had developed shields that could absorb enemy weapons fire and convert it into power for human ships. The technology made human vessels nearly invulnerable while allowing them to fight longer battles without running out of energy. President Nancy Foster established the Coalition of Free Worlds, which included humanity and all the species that had successfully rebelled against Zephyrian rule. The coalition shared technology and military resources while coordinating their resistance against the Empire. Major Alex Turner's raiders struck at the heart of the Empire when they infiltrated the Zephyrian capital system and destroyed the main communication hub that coordinated military operations across the galaxy. The attack left alien commanders unable to communicate with their fleets for weeks. The raid on the capital was Alex's most dangerous mission, but it crippled the Empire's ability to coordinate their response to the multiple rebellions. Zephyrian forces found themselves fighting isolated battles without support or clear orders from their high command. Captain Brian Lewis led the technical team that hacked into the Zephyrian military network and downloaded the complete battle plans for their operations against rebellious worlds. This intelligence allowed the coalition to warn their allies and prepare defenses against incoming attacks. The war had fundamentally changed from a human struggle for survival into a galactic revolution for freedom. Species that had never dreamed of independence were now fighting alongside humans against their former masters. The Zephyrian Empire was collapsing under the weight of too many enemies. Admiral Rebecca Harris prepared for the final phase of the war by assembling the largest fleet in human history. Ships from dozens of liberated worlds joined the human navy to form a force that could challenge the Empire's remaining strongholds. The coalition fleet included vessels from 12 different species, each contributing their unique technologies and fighting styles to the common cause. Human ships served as the backbone of the force, but they were supported by alien allies who brought their own strengths to the battle. Admiral Kethvar realized that his empire was doomed unless he could find a way to break the coalition before it became too powerful. He began planning a desperate final battle that would determine whether the galaxy remained under Zephyrian control or became free forever. The war entered its fourth and final year, with humanity leading a coalition of free worlds against the crumbling Zephyrian Empire. Admiral Jake Morrison had been promoted to Fleet Admiral and now commanded the largest military force in galactic history. The man who had once watched helplessly as aliens destroyed his brother's colony was now leading the fight to liberate an entire galaxy. The coalition fleet assembled at the edge of the Zephyr system, where the Empire's capital world orbited, a dying red star. Jake's force included over 3,000 ships from 27 different species that had thrown off Zephyrian rule. The diverse fleet represented every corner of the galaxy and every dream of freedom that had been suppressed for millennia. Admiral Rebecca Harris commanded the human contingent of the fleet from her flagship USS Victory. The massive battleship was the most advanced vessel humanity had ever built, incorporating technology from across the galaxy. Rebecca had become known as the Iron Admiral for her tactical brilliance and unshakable courage under fire. Dr. Elena Martinez had equipped the coalition ships with weapons and defenses that surpassed even original Zephyrian technology. Her team had spent 4 years learning from captured alien equipment and improving it through human innovation. The coalition fleet was more powerful than any force the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Kethvar waited at Zephyr Prime with the last remnants of the Empire's military might. He commanded nearly 2,000 ships crewed by the most loyal Zephyrian forces and their remaining allies. The old admiral knew this would be the final battle that determined the galaxy's future. The Zephyrian fleet was still formidable, but it was vastly outnumbered and facing an enemy that had learned all their tactics and weaknesses. Kethvar had spent 4 years watching humans turn his empire's own strengths against them. Now he faced the ultimate test of everything the Zephyrians had believed about power and conquest. President Nancy Foster broadcast a message to every world in the galaxy as the fleets prepared for battle. She spoke of freedom and hope to billions of beings who had lived their entire lives under Zephyrian rule. Her words reached even the most remote colonies and inspired countless acts of rebellion. The battle began when Jake's forces entered the Zephyr system and found the enemy fleet waiting in defensive formation around their capital world. The Zephyrians had positioned their strongest ships to protect the planet where their High Council was meeting in emergency session to decide the Empire's fate. Commander Greg Anderson led the first wave of coalition ships into battle-flying vessels, donated by recently liberated worlds. The diverse fleet included sleek Altarian cruisers alongside massive human battleships and swift reconnaissance craft from a dozen other species. Each ship fought with the fury of people who had finally tasted freedom. The space battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Thousands of ships clashed across the entire star system, while the fate of countless worlds hung in the balance. The coalition forces fought with desperate courage while the Zephyrians defended their last stronghold with equal determination. Captain Nicole Johnson commanded the USS Liberty during a direct assault on the Zephyrian flagship where Admiral Kethvar directed the defense. The two massive ships exchanged devastating broadsides while smaller vessels swirled around them like angry insects. Major Alex Turner led a special operations team that infiltrated Zephyr Prime itself while the space battle raged overhead. His mission was to capture the High Council and prevent them from ordering the destruction of liberated worlds in a final act of spite. The raid required penetrating the most heavily defended facility in the Empire. The turning point came when human ships began using a new tactic that no one had expected. Instead of trying to defeat the Zephyrian fleet through superior firepower, they began broadcasting messages directly to alien crews, offering them the chance to surrender and join the coalition. Thousands of Zephyrian soldiers had grown tired of this endless war that had brought nothing but death and destruction. When they heard promises of freedom and equality, many chose to lay down their weapons rather than continue fighting for an empire that no longer inspired their loyalty. Entire ships began switching sides during the battle as their crews mutinied against officers who wanted to fight to the death. The Zephyrian fleet started to collapse from within as soldiers chose hope over blind obedience to their failing government. Admiral Kethvar watched in horror as his own forces turned against him. The humans had done something that violated every principle of warfare he understood. They had offered his soldiers something more valuable than victory. They had offered them a future worth living for. The final confrontation came when Jake Morrison's flagship engaged Kethvar's dreadnought in single combat, while the rest of the battle swirled around them. The two admirals who had started this war 4 years earlier would finally face each other in the ultimate test of their opposing philosophies. The duel between the two flagships lasted for hours as they exchanged fire at point-blank range. Both ships suffered terrible damage, but neither captain would yield. Jake fought for the freedom of the galaxy, while Kethvar defended the only life he had ever known. The battle ended when Alex Turner's team successfully captured the High Council and forced them to order a complete ceasefire. The remaining Zephyrian ships laid down their weapons as their government surrendered unconditionally to the coalition forces. Admiral Kethvar was among the last to surrender, but he finally accepted that his empire was finished. The old warrior met with Jake Morrison aboard the USS Victory and formally transferred control of all Zephyrian territories to the Coalition of Free Worlds. President Nancy Foster arrived at Zephyr Prime to oversee the establishment of a new galactic government based on freedom and equality rather than conquest and domination. The Galactic Federation would include every species as equal members with no single race holding power over others. The former Zephyrian territories were liberated and their populations given the choice of joining the Federation or remaining independent. Most chose to join the new government that promised them rights and freedoms they had never experienced under the Empire. Even the Zephyrians themselves were offered membership in the Federation as equals rather than conquerors. Many accepted the opportunity to rebuild their civilization based on cooperation instead of domination. The species that had once ruled the galaxy through fear learned to live as partners with their former subjects. Jake Morrison was elected as the first president of the Galactic Federation, but he insisted on term limits to prevent any individual from accumulating too much power. The new government was designed to serve all species equally and protect the rights that so many had died to achieve. The war that began with the massacre of 50,000 human colonists ended with the liberation of billions of beings across the galaxy. Humanity had entered the stars as explorers and nearly became victims of alien conquest. Instead, their refusal to surrender had transformed them into the leaders of a new age of freedom. Fleet Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked out at the stars that had once seemed so hostile. Human ships were departing for unexplored regions of the galaxy, but now they traveled as liberators rather than refugees. The aliens had thought humanity would break under pressure, but instead they had become unstoppable.